welcome back to Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast. We are loving meeting some incredible people as part of the ECNL Coaches Symposium and AGM, including a man who's got an incredible resume and one that the leaders of ECNL, Christian Lavers, Jason Cutney, Ralph Richards, Jen Winigold, Doug Bracken, you name it, they are fired up about having Ceri Bowley as the new Technical Advisor. He did amazing things in Australia. Then he was the head of the Man City football group for coaching support with multiple teams that come out of the Man City umbrella, and that barely touches the tape of all the great things he's done. But first, let me say what a pleasure it is to be with you, Ceri. Thanks for being here.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I barely touched as I said, the tape of your story. So look, it's a blank canvas. It's a podcast. So if you don't mind, you know your elevator speech. Tell us where you were born, how you fell into this, the different steps along the way. And do me a favor, don't be humble. Like, break down all the steps because all of them are pretty cool.
Okay, I'll do my best.
All right.
So born in Wales, grew up there for most of my life. My family home is still Wales. So even when I travel and I'm at different clubs and whatever, I still keep the base for my family to be Wales. It's nice to go home, so that feeling's always good. Played from a very young age. Dad was a coach, so in terms of football influence, he was the first really that really influenced me growing up as a young player. And obviously you have others around family that influence you a lot. My mother was a massive influence on me in terms of who I am as a person today. And then started to play more seriously, I suppose, and went through football academies, ended up at Bristol Rovers, which was where I went through to play reserve level as it was then, before the new structure that is now in place. There was no kind of under-23 B team at that point. Didn't make it as a pro, but always focused on education. So mum and dad were always integral to that, to make sure that I continued to be educated as I went through. And when I left the pro game, it was always with the intention of trying to work at the best level possible. I had kind of two roles in mind at that point. It was more director of football, as it was called then. It's probably now better known as sporting director in most places, and academy director. And part of that was because I was never going to have 500 Premier League games or Football League games behind me as a player. And so at that point, being a coach was quite difficult. Most of them were ex-players that had long careers in the game. That's obviously changed quite dramatically in the last 15 years, particularly with the likes of whether Jose Mourinho coming in, who obviously had a career but not at the top level, so he was a little bit different in that way. Wenger to a degree, although Wenger was a good player himself. But those guys have really changed the landscape, and you see a lot more now of coaches coming from a wider background that are now head coaches, managers, whatever you want to call them in the game. But that wasn't my reference point at that point in time. So I'm 35 now, so when you think about when I was 16, 17 years of age, leaving that club, my reference point then was how can I work in the game, how can I work at the top level. And I went about on a journey that I would say has been purposeful, every step of it. Not in terms of destination, because you can never plan for that, but in terms of what I wanted to be, it's always been purposeful, and I knew I had to be different. I had to bring something else to the table, because as I've mentioned, I didn't have the esteemed playing background at the professional level, and so I gave up playing quite young. I played semi-pro up until about 22, broke my leg, and at that point I was about to embark on a different journey in education, and decided, right, that was going to be it for playing. My dad wasn't too pleased about it, but that's what the decision I took, because I wanted to use the 10 years or so that I would have had as a player to really learn and coach and do the things that was going to help me get to where I wanted to get to. So went through undergraduate, masters while working full-time, and then PhD at Cardiff Met, which was a kind of collaboration with the Football Association of Wales as well, linked to their coach education, coaching and the psychology element of developing adolescent footballers and people, and worked for actually across the border for the English FA for part of that time as well, full-time. So about 18 months into my PhD, I started full-time employment, which was tough, I've got to be honest, because I was trying to juggle the two, both on a full-time capacity and whilst also still trying to coach and be involved in the game in different ways. So I kind of went through as I was going through my degree and masters, it was about try to learn as much as possible about as many disciplines as possible. So spending time going in at Cardiff City at the time as an analyst, went in there and used to do one half while the actual full-time analyst did the other half, so that we could get things prepared ready for the manager, who was Dave Jones at the time. And that was just voluntary role, getting experience. Spent a lot of time with sports scientists, strength and conditioning coaches to understand their world. But psych and coaching was always going to be the thing that really captured me, mainly because as a player, psych was the area that I struggled with most. I still think it's the hardest area to really help someone thrive, because you can't see a lot of it. It's hard to measure a lot of it. So that was always the thing that really captured me, and that was always going to be what I ended up following as my path. But I knew and recognised that there were so many things that I felt in my youth career that we didn't have. Resources that weren't available at clubs. Developing players holistically, it wasn't really a thing. The physical thing took off, but the other things were still lacking behind. So, and even now to a degree, it's something that I still try to invest time in, learning, what are the new things that are coming in those disciplines. Keeping in touch with mentors that help me along the way that come from those backgrounds is something that I really actively try to do to make sure that I understand the game properly, because when you're in a leadership sort of position, I think it's important. Of course, you have your niche, you have your area of expertise, but I think it's really important to have a breadth of knowledge as well, and not only know the area that you know, because you have to piece it together. And particularly in those technical leadership positions, you have to be able to piece all of the different disciplines together, really, and bring people together. So that was my kind of focus, if you like, for a large part through my career, and still is. I'm still trying to learn as much as I can and trying to get things that I don't already have. Education's important to me. I've been out of the game only since beginning of December, but I've already started 2 short courses and just about completed both of them. Languages, reaching out to other people, learning from people. That's something that I think is really important for longevity in this game.
One takeaway I want to get back to, and that is at 15 and 16, you already had the foresight to think ahead and know where you were as a player. I want to come back to that, because in the meantime, you knew to get where you wanted to get at 15, 16, when I was thinking about whether I was getting a Big Mac or a quarter pounder with cheese. You had much deeper thoughts for sure, but you did all of that schooling. Now, again, without being humble, coming off of all that schooling, tell me where Australia fits in and Man City fits in and Scotland. I mean, all the stops. So you do all that schooling, and then just go in chronological order for me if you can.
So the FA was the first full-time role in the game, the English FA, and then came from there back into academia in University of South Wales. So it's in Wales. That was around a football degree or a soccer degree. Course leader for the soccer degree, but we also were writing a master's at that point. We've attracted quite a few esteemed coaches, let's say, onto that master's program, particularly in the initial years, and worked with a colleague on that, which was a great experience. And then from there, City Football Group, and of course Melbourne City are one of the clubs, so that's where the Australian link starts to come in. So the core clubs, NYCFC is another. That was a big priority for us. Mumbai City, and then the list goes on in terms of all the different clubs. Yokohama are part of the group, but are different in the model. So you could break it down, I suppose, in terms of flagship clubs, those that need to win, and I've mentioned them, and obviously Man City's the other. Then you have kind of on the verge, some of them flagship like Girona, but also a development club for players coming through the pathway. Troyes, another one in Ligue 1 in France. We've got Lommel in Belgium, second division club in Belgium. They've now got Palermo in Italy, that came in right at the end of my time at the group, really. And then we have South America, so you have Montevideo City Torquay, South America, that's a big one. Sichuan in China. So it truly is a global club, They've just got Bahia now in Brazil. I didn't play any part in that because it was after my time. So that was 3.5 years on my journey. And then that's where I met Gio. He came to spend 6 months with us after he left Feyenoord on a sabbatical. and he travelled around the world with me to these clubs and got to understand the methodology, the way that I worked with coaches, and that's where the Scotland stop came in. I was never, as I said right from the start, my intention was never really first team football, but it was an experience that I felt would really help me in where I want to get to in the technical leadership stuff, because understanding the pressures day to day of being in that environment and what coaches now have to go through, we know that the tenures of coaches is pretty small. It's getting smaller by the season at the moment. But really being able to empathise with them and know what they have to go through on a day-to-day, I think will help me in the longer term in being in those positions. So when I was at City, I was recruiting those coaches and I was supporting them in their environment, but I was never part of their team. So I wasn't the highs and lows of the win and losses. Of course, I rode the roller coaster with them, because that's what you do when you're supporting people. But it was never the be-all and end-all, because I had to support all the clubs. So it was never about just that one club in that moment. Whereas when I went into first-team football, that's what it became about. And, it's all consuming in that way. So that's where that stop on the journey came. And I was only going to go into first-team for certain people. There was a small number of managers that I would have gone in to work with. And Gio was one of them, because first and foremost, he's an absolutely outstanding person. And that's really important to me. So, if you're going to go in and risk losing your job, which is eventually what happened, you're going to do it for good people. And that it's not something that I want to get on a roller coaster or on a hamster wheel of doing little stints everywhere. But for someone like that, the experience was always going to be incredible. So yeah, that's where that stop came in.
Great to hear the wisdom and the passion of Ceri, the new technical advisor for the ECNL. One more question before we take our first break, and it was what I promised. I want to go back to the notion of 15, 16, and I feel bad on a soccer podcast comparing it to baseball, but I'm very much an historian for the greats, and Babe Ruth, you've heard of Babe Ruth. He at one point called his shot. He pointed out to left field, and next thing you know, the ball is over the wall in left field. And you kind of called your shot at a really, really young age, did you not? A little bit.
Yeah, I don't think I'd compare myself to Babe, but in terms of
well, you know what I mean.
Wisdom and quality. But I get the line of thinking, yeah, and I think I'd attribute that a lot to parents, family, in terms of the importance of education. That was made clear to me from day one. They always supported my education, encouraged me. And look, I was never top of the class or anything academically. I think the biggest thing that I've learned or that I've developed through my career is hard work. And everywhere where I've got to, and everyone says it, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's all been about work rate for me. Because I was never, as a footballer, I was okay. I had some talent, but I was never like a high flyer that found it easy. Everything was easy, and it was the same in academia. So I had to work. I really had to work hard, and they encouraged me. That was the start of the platform. So they always encouraged me around that. But I had such a passion for the game that I always wanted to work in football, and if it wasn't going to be football, it was going to be sport. So I think that helped. And I speak to a lot of young people now, and even my nieces, nephews, and my children. And so when they don't know what they want to do, it can be quite frustrating, because I'm like, I knew. But I have to also appreciate that that's not everybody. I'm probably in a minority in some ways, knowing at such an early age. But probably one thing I've been quite good at, but sometimes it can also be limiting in some ways, is I've always known what the journey needs to look like. I've always been good at looking ahead. So, what's their career been? So if there's someone that I admire in the game, what have they done? What are the steps that they've taken along the way? But also, what does the game need? And as a result, what are the things that I need to be better at? And so I've always been quite good at that. I suppose some of the detrimental part of that is not living in the moment enough and enjoying experiences when they happen, and really riding the wave of successes along the way, because I'm always like, right, what's next? What do I need to do next? And that's something that I'm trying to get better at, live in the moment. But it's not easy. When you've always kind of worked in a certain way, then it's tough to break it. It's like a habit in some ways. So, yeah, so I knew at that point it was always going to be about the game. I'm not one that needs to be front and centre. So that again probably lends itself to why not having to be the manager is something that probably helps, and it's probably something I believe in. I'm okay being in the background, supporting in the background and helping other people to be successful. So again, that probably lends itself to why the two roles I picked out from the start in many ways, because you play a significant role, you lead things, but you lead things more in the background rather than being front and center of everything, and like, this is who I am, and that's not me, that ego, and some people are very good at it, but that's not something that I see as myself, really.
Great conversation here on Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast with Ceri Bowley. Bowley, right? Ceri Bowley, the technical advisor now for the ECNL. A fascinating career. Two things I want to say as we go to break is, one, he talks about his journey. The man's only 35 years old, so he's still got a long way to go on his journey and has accomplished so much. And along the way, he has worked with and along with some incredible people. We'll learn about some of those experiences when we return to Breaking the Line, the ECNL podcast.